evening and welcome. Tonight we're going to be continuing my Countries of the World series. And this week we're going to learn all about Myanmar. Sorry that the map's a little zoomed out this week because Myanmar is a very long country, so kind of hard to get it in on a good angle when it's so long. So I always start off each country with thinking about what you know already about the country. And like most countries, I really only knew the recent history in the past 10-15 years or so, which hasn't really been glowing in this region. Not very pristine. And we're gonna find out why it has that reputation. But I think what a lot of people genuinely know is this picture right here of the Padang women with their long gold neck bracelets, neck rings. The Padang are actually one of over 130 ethnic groups in Myanmar. It's an incredibly diverse region. However, the region is at least 90% Buddhist. So most groups are Buddhist, but there is a lot of diversity in culture and even dialects all throughout. I'll show you a better political map when we reach that part in its history. You'll really see the different areas where different groups live, but you can tell in some of the names around here. You can see right here the Shan Plateau is where the Shan people live. This big region here, very dominant ethnic group. The Chin Hills, the Chin people live, so on and so forth. Sorry, my cat's giving himself a little bath. Sorry if you can hear that. But the main ethnic group are the Bamar people, which is where we get the name Burma, which you might have heard this country called before because it was known as Burma for quite a long time, a few hundred years or so. It only very recently changed its name and the names of some of its large cities and areas. Myanmar. Where does that name come from? It was really hard to find because actually nobody really knows for sure where this word really comes from. Just like Burma was named after the Bamar people, the Bamar people were apparently originally called Myanmar. Which leads me to how to pronounce this country. So in different languages we pronounce countries differently. My best example is, in English we say Paris, but it's really Paris, when we don't say that. But then again, I live in California in the United States, and in France they would say Californie aux États-Unis. So every country says other countries differently. So the only right way of pronouncing a country is really how your country pronounces it. But I mean, you can go extreme and pronounce every country like how they pronounce it, which is a bit much. But Myanmar, for people that live there, don't pronounce this R. And it's very much 2 syllables. It's more like, whereas in English it can be Myanmar or Myanmar, so the latter is the one I tend to say the most. Just kind of rolls off the tongue, Myanmar. So, in ancient times, Myanmar people became Bamar people, who eventually rose to power in the country, but let's go way back and figure out how that happened. And that starts off by looking at its geography. So in modern times we have the borders of India, China, Laos, and Thailand. Not to mention Myanmar has lots and lots of little islands down here, like the Cocos are my favorite, that's the best name, but lots of little islands also down here. And they have huge, huge mountains. They just get the very tip of the Himalayas right here. And Myanmar's biggest mountain is right here. It's called Kakabo Razi. Largest mountain, which is apparently very perilous to climb. But Myanmar is surrounded by mountains and hills, and right in the middle is this beautiful lush green valley. And right in the middle of the valley is the longest river that runs through Myanmar. There are lots of long rivers that flow partly through Myanmar, form the borders, but the longest river in the actual country is the Irrawaddy River. It flows down from the Himalayas right through the country. Right in the middle of this valley and out here into the delta, which this map calls the mouths of the Irrawaddy. I apologize for that loud car. While I was saying that, they've been apparently circling around, and that was the quietest they were. Not the time for races. It's very late. Time to go to sleep and learn about geography. But the Irrawaddy River and this region that creates this huge, magnificent delta is where our story's going to begin. So as you can tell, this area became very lush and plentiful with water by the sea, and it's perfect for growing rice. Early mans lived along the Irrawaddy for a very long time. Actually, there's been evidence of Homo erectus found in the valley, and of course early Homo sapiens as well. There've actually been cave paintings found in this valley from somewhere between 10,000 and 6,000 BCE. My cat's still having his bath, I apologize. But this water was a vital lifeline for the very early peoples of the region. It was perfect for farming. And actually, some of the earliest evidence of some domestic animals like chickens and pigs found in this area, especially down here. Eventually, many city-states sprung up along the river here, and especially right around here. Now, like I said, this is a very brief history. The whole ancient city-states and the ancient Pew Empire, dynasty, whatever you want to call it, is a whole video in and of itself. So I'm just going to gloss over big chunks of history. So I apologize if you're here for a Myanmar historical deep dive, but this is very relaxing, quick history of Myanmar. So we'll just say that there were many different city-states all along the river, all throughout the very early times in human history. And this is when we see Buddhism enter the country, particularly from India. There's lots of trading between the two countries over the hills, and Buddhism was brought over from that. The biggest ancient realm we're going to talk about, because we're going to mention it in another video coming up, was started by the Pamar people, which I mentioned the Pew people that had their own rise and fall of their kingdom, but the Pamar were like a subculture of that. There's a lot of subcultures of subcultures of subcultures. So the Pamar rose to power after the Pew people and the Mon people, also in this region, kind of fell from grace, and the Pamars rose up and they created a city called Pagan. And they built many Buddhist pagodas. And the more famous ones are found right here in this little corner of the Irrawaddy. We'll talk about that in the UNESCO World Heritage video. But the Pagan kingdom was founded sometime around the 1050s, 1060s, and that's when Buddhism really exploded in the region. It really spread all throughout the area here. And the only reason that this empire fell was because of the Mongols who invaded. in 1287 and sacked the whole kingdom. And, Mongols are going to be brought up in a lot of videos because they were so important to what they did in all of Asia, really, all of continental Asia. So it's not the last time you'll hear about the Mongols in world history, but they came in, did their business, and pretty much left. But, some stayed behind. There's always ancestors of invaders. And that's where we get the Shan people. So the Shan region formed right along here. And that's where those people resided and lived and still live to this day. Out of the ashes of Bagan Kingdom, around the 14th century, new ones started to spring up. The main ones we'll talk about are Ava and Hantawadi. Just put a pin in Hantawadi for a second, but the Avas were really about trying to unite all the different cultures and regions of the region, but through war, unfortunately. I always feel like if they just talk this out, people would cooperate, people would unify a lot easier, but they were very warlike and tried to conquer a lot of land, but that really weakened them over the long term. And eventually the Shans conquered them in 1527. Out of the ashes of that mess came the Tonku Dynasty, which you can see the city of Tonku right there. Tonku. They rose up and actually did do a lot of conquering, and their empire pretty much spread over what is modern Thailand, Laos, and Cambodia, and parts of India as well. Thailand at the time, just to note, was known as Ayutthaya. This region wasn't called that. Just keep that in mind. It pops up later. So by the mid-16th century, the greatest king in the region was named Bajamok. And he reminds me a lot of Alexander the Great in that he was a strong leader and a strong conqueror. So that when he died in 1581, his empire kind of died with him, and it had pretty much collapsed by 1599, and a lot of land that he had claimed was reconquered by Ayutthaya and actually by the Portuguese along the coast. Eventually they did regroup in 1613, ruled in the region, not as widespread, but just as strong, honestly. In 1740, the Mon people founded the new Hantawadi Kingdom, or the restored Hantawadi Kingdom. I told you that would come back. And they conquered the Tonku Dynasty in 1752, became the major power dynamic in the region. In the hills and the mountains, a new group of people sprung up, led by a man named Olampaya. And in 1759, he and his people defeated the restored Hantawadi Kingdom. And pretty much what was left are basically the borders of modern-day Myanmar, but then, of course, was called Burma, after the Burma people. Again, this is another large part of their history, but just know that they also fought a lot of wars with Ayutthaya and China. And as their territory expanded out, they wound up brushing against the territory of British India. And Britain was just a bear you did not want to poke, and they definitely poked. And Britain had the idea of having control of at least the coastline, so that it would be a good midpoint between Singapore and Calcutta in India. They really had their eyes on Burma. In 1826, they launched the first Anglo-Burmese War, which resulted in them winning and seizing the Arakan region, or today it's mainly known as the Rakhine State. They fought again in 1852, the Second Anglo-Burmese War. Once again, the British won, and they pretty much won all of this region, and they didn't really found, but set up the city of Rangoon to be their big trading port. So most of the Burmese that had lost the war had retreated up here into the Mandalay region. And France was a major power on the other side of this region around here. And they were kind of negotiating because France has always been an enemy of Britain. That's another history fact. France and Britain really didn't get along until like World War I, honestly. Anytime before that, they did not get along. So Britain was very alarmed by them trying to align themselves with France. So in 1885, they launched the Third Anglo-Burmese War, which once again the British won, and they pretty much had control of the entire country by the end of that. And they set up Burma as a British colony on January 1st, 1886. Rangoon became the capital city, and like I said, it was mainly used as a in-between trading port between their territories in this area. Now, of course, the Burmese were very bitter toward the British. I mean, as you would be, have someone come in and take over your whole country kind of just because it was economically viable. It's not a good reason, but again, this is a closed over history, just roll with it. So there were many, many protests against the British, many fights and demonstrations against them, but Britain at the time was so strong, that was a pretty weak fight, so they really did plot on how to get the British out and had a good idea. By 1937, Britain set up Burma as a separate administered colony so that it would have its own like ruling system, its own government, but controlled by Britain. And then that's when they started to plot on how to get rid of Britain very seriously. One of their generals was named Aung San, and he went over to Japan to train on how to get rid of the British. He started the Burma Independence Army there in 1940 and worked out an agreement with Japan that if Japan invaded, because at this time they had already invaded China, the war was raging in this area. They agreed that if they invaded Burma and got the British out, that Japan would hand the country back over to them. Japan agreed, and they invaded, and they did indeed beat the British in a big way and took over the region. Then the Burmese realized their big mistake in that the British were actually better at taking over a country than Japan, because while Britain didn't really respect them as a culture, never took their shoes off in temples or let them wear their traditional monk clothing, the Japanese were just burning down villages and slaughtering people, so they realized that living under British rule was better. So they switched sides to the Allies and helped Britain come back in and kick the Japanese out, which they did in July 1945. And after that, Britain was pretty much ready to award them with independence. So Aung San pretty much got all the leaders of all the different ethnic groups in the country together, and 1947 created the Panglong Agreement, which pretty much set the borders of modern-day Myanmar and all the states. So let me show you in this book what it looks like. Perfect, I can redo it. So here you can see all the different states. This is kind of an old map. You'll see why in a bit, but here you can see the Shan state. There's Mandalay, Rakhine, Bago, Irrawaddy, Sagaing, Kachin, the Chins. The Mons are down here. So these were the borders that they set so that every ethnic group had their own state. I mean, they could live wherever they wanted, but each group had its own designated region, which I think was pretty smart. A lot of unrest happens because people don't feel like they have proper space, so everyone in Burma had their own proper space. where we're going to see conflict start with the Rohingya people who lived up in here. They were they are predominantly Muslim, and they were totally fine with British rule and sided with them in the war with Japan throughout the whole thing. So there was always kind of a disagreement between them and the Burmese. But in that, because we're definitely coming back to that. So the Panglong Agreement, like I said, set up the country as we see it today, the political borders that we have today. But Aung San, even with all of his hard work, never got to see an independent Burma because he was assassinated in 1947. And independence was officially declared on January 4th, 1948. Now, for a while, Burma did rule itself as a republic, holding elections. They actually weren't doing too bad for a new country. Throughout this series, you're going to see lots of new countries form. You've already seen in my Haiti video, when they became an independent country, they were incredibly weak and were really taken advantage of by really powerful, strong-willed dictators. Unfortunately, Burma did become like that. On March 2nd, 1962, the government was overthrown in a coup d'etat by General Ne Win. And he basically revamped the country to become socialized. Like no political parties, complete control over the media, all the bells and whistles of socialism. Extreme socialism, I should say. And then, of course, there were many, many protests against him. Which, of course, a strong government like that fights back by firing on the protesters, which leads to more protests, which leads to more conflict from the government. It all came to a head in 1988, what was known as the 8888 Uprising, which was mainly led by a woman named Aung San Suu Kyi, which, if that name sounds familiar, she's the daughter of Aung San. She started a democratic political party. By democratic, I mean pro-democracy political party, I should say. That uprising led to the government being overthrown by a military junta, which claimed to be pro-democratic, but they immediately put the whole country under martial law. Like a strict martial law. No protests, no speaking out, nothing. And they basically arrested. Well, I've got to stop saying basically. I realize when I watch these videos back, I say everything's basically this. They didn't basically do it, they did. They put Aung San Suu Kyi under house arrest, which they're going to wind up doing many times. Every time they would let her out, she would start leading more protests, and they would put her back under house arrest. And she lived under house arrest in Rangoon for many, many years, like decades. It was this military junta, which called itself the State Law and Order Restoration Council, that changed the name to Myanmar in 1989. They held elections in 1990, which led to a victory of the pro-democracy party led by Aung San Suu Kyi, and they basically just ignored the results of the election and just kept things as they were, which is not what you're supposed to do. They held control for a very long time, until 2011. They eventually slowly fulfilled their promise by moving the country toward democracy. In 2008, they held a referendum that, the results of which led to, obviously, people wanting democracy in their country. They held elections again in 2010, which were deemed fraudulent, mainly because Aung San Suu Kyi and her party urged people to not vote in it. And the results came out with high numbers, and obviously that many people didn't vote, so there were a lot of protests against that. All the bells and whistles of corrupt government protests. And the military junta actually dissolved in 2011 as a result of that. democracy really, truly began in 2011. This book and another book I'm going to show you in another video came out in this time. So, a lot of updated information aren't in these books. So, I'm going to show you lots of cool pictures in this book later in a bit. So, Aung San Suu Kyi was released from house arrest, and she was vital in implementing a new government. Now, the military never really let control go of the government, even though most of the seats in the government are voted in by the people. 25% has to be held by the military. So the military still has a strict say in the way of life of the people of Myanmar, but for the most part it is democratic. The pro-democracy party became the majority in 2015. 2016 saw the first non-military president take power, and Aung San Suu Kyi became the state counselor. Like, they made a position for her because in their constitution they have a rule that if you are married to someone who is in Burmese or had kids that are Burmese, then you can't be the leader. So she acts as the leader, but she's not officially the leader of the country. Now, 2016 is where we see the Rohingya Crisis really kick off. And it's very long and complicated. It's seen very differently from the Burmese perspective than it is in the Western perspective. The Rohingyas, like I said, are predominantly Muslim in a very militaristic Buddhist country. They've been very brutally attacked by the military to the point where they've been driven out of the country. It's by definition an ethnic cleansing, put it gently. Again, this is a relaxation video. The government denies this. They say that they are just weeding out terrorists. And indeed, there are Rohingya terrorist groups that have attacked Burmese groups, but I don't feel like slaughtering all the Rohingya is a good option. And Aung San Suu Kyi has really spoken out in favor of what's going on in this region. She's supporting her government, which has really dimmed her spotlight on the national stage. I mean, she won the Nobel Peace Prize back in the 90s for her work in the country, and some people are calling for her to have it revoked because she's basically supporting a genocide and defended the government arresting journalists who were covering the genocide, which is really weird since she was arrested so many times for rightfully protesting. But that's where the situation is now. There are elections coming up in November 2020. Right now it's September 2020 while I'm recording this, so things could change in the country very, very soon. We'll find out. But one of the biggest developments from the new government was moving the capital. They renamed Rangoon when they renamed the country. They named it Yangon. That's what it's known as today. And they moved the capital up here to this newly constructed city called Naypyidaw. And like I said when I showed you the map that it's not completely accurate, it's because they hadn't finished building the city yet when this book was made. So the city was entirely constructed just to be government buildings and housing for government employees. So even though it's the capital, it's very sparsely populated because it's a brand new city that's pretty much just government workers and their families. So Yangon and Mandalay are still the most populated areas in the country. That's pretty much where we are today in the country of Myanmar. Let's look at the book. This is my favorite part, flipping through the book. First of all, I want to show you this incredible face paint that they're wearing, which is actually sunscreen, and it's called Tanaka. And it's made from tree bark, and it's very beautifully painted on the face. It can be painted in designs, or just, used as sunscreen, and it's nice and cooling and actually has really good SPF. But it's considered an important part of the culture, Myanmar, and Lots of women wear it throughout their whole lives as a beauty aspect or cultural aspect. Here you can see this little one has them on their face, and right there too, and right there. Like I said, Myanmar is filled with these beautiful pagodas. This is the Mandalay Royal Palace, and here you can see all the pagodas in this landscape. It's stunningly beautiful. Here it's mentioning how it's called the Land of Gold because of all the golden pagodas. Marco Polo coined that term because he was the first Westerner to set foot in the country. So as you can see, there's a lot of mountainous regions and beautiful valleys and gorgeous beaches too. This is a tapir. Have you ever heard of a tapir? They're really cute. They're actually related to like rhinoceroses, but they kind of look like pigs. If you've ever played Animal Crossing, that's what Luna is. Let me show you the best pictures in this book, because there are a lot of them. Look at these pagodas. Absolutely stunning. I've been watching a lot of videos of like tourists visiting the pagodas, and just absolutely stunning. Here's Aung San. And here we go. There's some pro-democracy movements. Here's Aung San Suu Kyi. She actually has a really nice voice. If you ever hear her talk, she really needs to do ASMR. She's a gorgeous voice. Here's some monks protesting. Let's see. Oh, and this is the new flag that was created in 2010. Yeah. I was going to say I just did a video on flags. You can check that out. If I figure it out, I'll put a card in. But later on, I'll show you the other old book that still has the old flag in it, so you'll see what it looks like. Farming is still a big part of daily life in Myanmar. It's a very underdeveloped country in terms of economy. Logging is a big part of the economy, especially because it's the main export of teak, which again in another video I'll talk about. But the logging recently has really led to, look how gorgeous, has really led to a lot of deforestation. So in the past 5 years or so, here you can see, it's really happened. There's a big truck full of logs. In the last 5 years, I'll see how there's been a big movement for restoring the forests, and the logging industry has greatly decreased since like 2015. Here's some gorgeous elephants. I'm gonna have a whole video on the elephants of Myanmar. I can't wait. I love elephants. As I was saying before, the Badong women that wear these as a beauty symbol. It's just their culture, and actually they can't take it off because, see, there's that ton of, very cool. I hate putting on sunscreen, but if I could like paint it on my face and make cool patterns, and I would wear it all the time. What was I saying? Oh, that they can't take those rings off because they wear them their whole lives. So they did their spines wouldn't be able to hold up their heads. But you know, that's their culture, honestly. Oh, baby. Little newborn baby. How cute. It's a girl getting her ears pierced. Isn't she gorgeous? I love the traditional makeup. Here's, another picture of some really beautiful traditional makeup. It's a bride and groom. Let's see. Oh, yes. So here we go. Buddhism is a massive part of daily life in Myanmar. Like I said, 90% of the population are Buddhist. This is the Shwedagon Pagoda. It is the largest in the country. It's in Yangon, and it's stunningly beautiful. Apparently, it contains hair from the Buddha, which is like crazy. That's really, really amazing. That would definitely be something to pray about and pray over, I think. I think it's so cool. Here's some Muslim men. Because like I said, there are a lot of different religions in the region. It's just that Buddhism is the predominant one. Look how beautiful. Oh, I want to see it in person one day. Absolutely stunning. Let's see, what else did I want to show you? Let's see, it's the Nanka. The writing. I want to do a whole video on the writing. I've really been trying to study at least the basics to show you guys. Because I know, at least for me, writing videos are really tingle triggering for me. So it's honestly a gorgeous, gorgeous language. I've always admired Burmese and the Thai language. I think the Southeast Asian languages look the most beautiful, in my opinion. This is a sound performance. They're traditional theater. And also marionettes were really, really big in like the 1800s. They had a lot of rules about how people could perform on stage, so marionettes were the big loophole. And then, of course, many different cultures have different dances. And the Shan people, if you ever see videos of their dances, it's absolutely stunning. Let's see what else I want to show you. Oh, how cute. Look at him. It's very common for young boys to be sent to Buddhist temples to train for at least, a year or so if they don't become full-fledged monks. But pretty much every young Buddhist boy goes to temple. Soccer is, of course, a major sport, as it is in almost every country. This is a sport called Chinlon, which is basically a keep the ball off the ground game, which is the best kind of games, I think. If you ever get a good group of people to play keep it off the ground. And Chinlon, you can use anything but your hands to keep it up off the ground. Best kind of games. And they do have lots of martial arts fighting in their own form of boxing as well. Festivals, of course. Festivals are an important part of life. There's Chinese New Year. This is a cool festival that I think we should adapt in the West, honestly. It's part of their New Year's festival. And it's to celebrate the end of the dry season and to kind of wash away everything from the past year. So they just squirt a bunch of water on each other. It sounds great. Look at these beautiful pagodas. There's Shwedagon Pagoda right there. Absolutely stunning temple. This looks safe. Here's another celebration from the lake people. There we go. The lake people that once a year will boat around with the small temples for people to pray in on their boats. And food, of course. Food's an important part of every culture. Of course, rice is the main food in the region. I think that's... Oh, look at this. I'm so crazy for shellfish. But I'm from San Francisco, so everyone here loves shellfish. It's the best in the world. Although that did look good. And that is basically the history of Myanmar. Look how pretty. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I've got a lot more treats coming for you this week about the country. I can't wait to show you. Thank you so much for watching, and I apologize for all the cars going by. I don't know why tonight all of a sudden I've had to cut out so many cars that just like looped around my house. I don't know, but Anyway, have a good, relaxing, peaceful night. If you're still awake, leave a